Welcome to Sales for Nerds. I'm your host and chief nerd, Ruben Swartz. If you started a business because you love serving clients but realized you didn't like the sales and marketing aspect of running that business so much, this is the podcast for you. Sales and marketing doesn't have to suck. It can actually be a lot of fun. And on this show, we're going to teach you how to connect instead of network, teach instead of market, help instead of sell, so you can keep serving people even while you're building your pipeline and growing your business. Now let's get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Rochelle Moulton, who is the host of the Soloist Women podcast. She is the co-host of the Business of Authority podcast with Jonathan Stark. If you haven't checked out the episode with Jonathan on Sales for Nerds, make sure you go listen to that as well. And Rochelle helps ambitious solo consultants grow their impact and their income without working more hours. So after listening to her podcasts, I thought she'd be the perfect person to come on Sales for Nerds and share some of her wisdom with you guys. So, Rochelle, welcome to Sales for Nerds. What do you have in your glass?
Oh, Ruben, this is actually a Fess Parker Chardonnay. It's from Central Coast in California, which is not that far from where I live.
Awesome. I'm not going to say this right, Domaine Guillaume Bourgois, which is a Loire Valley Cab Franc. And I don't know, it's quite nice.
Ooh,
so cheers.
It looks beautiful. Yes, cheers.
Well, Rochelle, how did you get to this point where you are now a consultant to consultants?
Well, it's a long story. I won't bore you with all of the details, but I essentially, professionally speaking, grew up in a big consulting firm. And I spent 10 years there. I became a partner and I worked with all kinds of brainiacs there. And then I left to start my own firm. So I had this, kind of was a partnership in this big firm, working my way through there. And then I had this boutique firm that I started and grew with a partner. So I had the experience of starting from scratch and consulting in a different way without that big, well-known name in front of us. And then eventually I sold that firm to Arthur Andersen. And a bunch of us went in as a group and we worked with them for a while. And then after that, we were part of the Enron implosion. So that kind of blew all that up. And so after that is really when I started focusing on this idea of consulting to consultants. I was doing that kind of work inside Andersen. I was coaching partners in the tax division on how to get better at selling. And so I had this idea, this coaching thing would be really interesting. And so essentially I started that and both consulted and coached with consultants since 2007.
At Andersen, you're coaching partners on sales techniques. How did you become the person that partners who probably don't want to be told they're not great at things, how did you become that person that they trusted with that important mission?
Well, it was related to why they bought us. They bought us because of our, what do I want to call it? I guess visibility in the Chicago market. We were a team of, the Wall Street Journal called us refugees from giant consulting firms. We were all women. We were, as a group, the people that I attracted were kind of done with the 60 to 80 hour weeks and being on airplanes all the time. Mm-hmm. And so what happened is that we were really successful in selling as this little tiny firm. I mean, we had 6 employees. We had up to 19 people, including contractors at our largest. And so we'd proven that we knew how to sell. And I wanted to do something different. I was running the firm. I was selling. I was leading people. I'd occasionally get involved directly in client projects. So part of the discussion when we sold the firm was, what do we do with you? Like, where do we put you? And they offered me 2 or 3 different things. And this was the thing that was the most interesting to me, because I wanted to see if I could take introverted tax people. And there were many people who were actually really good at selling, but there were a bunch who weren't, and they were at the partner level. And I wanted to see if it was possible to do it. I thought it was.
And
it worked.
All right.
I mean, I'm not going to suggest that I went in and immediately changed that. But what happened was it was very much of a one-to-one process. So it was helping somebody by going to a meeting with them, having a discussion on the way, having, helping to kind of guide the conversation and then helping them on the way back. And there were, as in all things with coaching, there are people who are coachable and people who are not. But with those who were coachable, we had some really terrific results. And I was very proud of them with the shifts that they made.
So let's talk about those shifts. What did you get them to do differently?
Well, the funny thing is that the ones that I'm talking about are the ones who were not really good at sales. And the reason most of them, I'm generalizing here, the reason most of them were not good at sales is because they were so focused on their technical knowledge and being right and showing how smart they were in a meeting. And what I was trying to show them is, yeah, that's important at the right juncture. But first, you've got to get some kind of a relationship, some kind of a connection with people, and not like that glad handing kind of sales that we think of with like used car sales people, but in a really genuine way. And they were just nervous about that. And once they realized that they sort of had permission to do that, and I would model it for them, they got more comfortable with it. I wouldn't say that like anybody decided that this was their favorite part of the day, but they were people who had to manage relationships and grow revenue. They would be assigned a client, and their job every year was to grow the revenue with that client. And they were kind of stuck doing that because they were in this narrow little hole essentially. And this allowed them to open it up a little bit, to understand when it was time to bring some of their colleagues in, which was always scary when you manage an account, to bring in somebody that's not you who might mess it up. So it was a lot of that. And I think the other thing which happened sometimes, because my other responsibility was to sell our practice into other practices internally, so that I would sit down with a partner of area X. And so I would think about it and I would ask them a question. Like, so for example, if I wanted to talk to the guy who worked with private equity firms, so my question was, so what would happen if they could sell their investment 3 months or 6 months sooner? Would that be worth something to you and to them? Like, why, yes, it would. Okay, so let's talk about how what we do over here could help your clients sell faster. What would that look like? So it's just, it's so simple, really. It's engaging people in getting what they want. I mean, that's really what sales is, at least for me.
Well, that really resonates with me. I think especially when you start out at some of these consulting firms, a lot of these people did pretty well in school, where you're sort of judged on your ability to know things and answer questions, not on your ability to interact well with others or convince colleagues of things. And then you build up expertise in a practice, whether it's in another consulting firm, or for me, I was at a tech firm, and you're not responsible for that revenue generation. You're responsible for answering questions about that thing, right? That's why you're in the room. And then suddenly you have responsibility for the whole room and the whole relationship. And I know for me, I felt like, well, I'm the guy who they bring in for these deep technical questions. I don't want to waste anyone's time, right? Like I wasn't trying to be mean about it. I thought I was being conscientious. But looking back, it's kind of obvious. Like if I go talk to my doctor and they talk to me the same way they would talk to a colleague, like that's going to be completely lost on me, and I'm not going to want to do anything, right? And they have to be like, Ruben, we're going to fix your shoulder. You're going to be okay. Not using whatever medical terms they would use. And I think it's so easy to fall into that trap of expertise, especially for the folks who are really good at the thing they do. They've been doing this for years and they appreciate every little nuance. But the client, they appreciate the results of all those nuances, but they don't necessarily care about all the details.
Well, one of the little tricks that I used to do when I was in the big firm, and I would have a room full of people. And so there might be like 5 or 6 clients, people from the client side. There might be, hopefully not more than 5 or 6 of us, is that I would put myself in or try to put myself in the shoes of the client. Like, what are they wanting to hear right now? And sometimes that meant that I would cut one of my colleagues off. Like I would try to do it appropriately and politely, but basically get them to stop on whatever track they were going down. And other times it was, to look at the client and to say, George, you might be wondering about this. Are you? And it gives the client a chance to jump in and make sure that we're on the track that they want to go to. And it's, it's trickier when you have a lot of people in the room, but if you can try to put yourself in the client's shoes instead of being nervous about, our own performance.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times that's what makes people nervous. We feel like we're on stage for something that is not our core skill set, and it makes us nervous. And so we do things like we talk too fast, or we talk too much, or we talk about things that aren't really relevant, or we have this agenda in our head, and the client, oh, this used to drive me crazy when it would happen in a big group meeting. The client would drop this huge clue, and the consultant would totally ignore it and keep down, the road that they wanted to travel on.
I've got 88 slides to get through, people, one after another.
I know. And maybe in that meeting, we're pitching something that's $50,000 and the client just dropped a $500,000 hint. That's happened too. So it's listening and getting out of our own way, I think, is half the battle.
Which is funny because a lot of these introverted people with those deep skills are actually very good at listening.
Yeah.
It's just that like the brain kind of shuts off when you go into sales mode and you go, I'd
actually rather be in a room full of introverts in a sales meeting than extroverts. In fact, I had a client once who he ran a financial advisory firm, and he kept hiring these people who couldn't sell. And I finally said, maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe you should find somebody who wants to sell. And he said, no, he goes, I want somebody who's going to listen. And so he had this team of, we used to call them left-handed introverts, because for some reason they were all left-handed too. But when they were in the meeting with the client, they were brilliant. Like they could close like nobody's business because they would listen. And so I think, it's not a popular opinion, but I actually think introverts can be really, really good at sales because they listen. I think your point is spot on.
When I think, especially these days, it's the pendulum is even more swung towards the introverts because the sales rep is typically not the gatekeeper of information anymore. We've already got the information. It's about solving the problem together. And if you can listen, that usually makes you better at diagnosing and helping to solve the problem.
Yeah. And I think we had this conversation all the time when I was in a big firm, because sales was a dirty word. And so we called it marketing.
Oh, okay. That's
when
so
we
different.
really meant sales, right? But if you could have somebody in a room, and my mentor was one of these kinds of people, if you can have somebody in a room who knows maybe 50% of the technical knowledge and then has 50% of that interpersonal interest and skill set and talent for relationships, then that's going to be a really good person to sell, because they're not only selling, they're doing other things as well, but they can understand both sides. It's like they're in the middle. If you think of technicians on one side and salespeople on the other side of a spectrum, these folks are in the middle. So it gives them more people that they can talk to and translate for and understand.
So this is great. And I could talk about just this part of your journey for a long time, but I'm sure there's some folks saying, okay, that's great, but that's Arthur Andersen or whatever. Let's get back to the next phase where you go back to helping soloists, and how do these lessons apply to these folks who don't have this giant organization behind them?
So, full disclosure, I write and talk a lot about authority and building authority. And there's an idea that you and I kind of went back and forth on a little bit, which is kind of a selling authority spectrum. And I think we have this idea that if we build authority, and by authority, I mean market authority, and that assumes that you're positioning yourself and your expertise in a niche where you've got a powerful client base, potential client base, you've got a powerful message, and we go about building authority. You build authority. This podcast is an example of an authority builder for you. For someone else, it could be some YouTube videos, or it could be writing or speaking, all of those things. So we do those things to build authority. And the more we build authority, so our brains say, oh, the less we have to actually sell, because the goal is to have everything come in over the transom by virtue of our authority. And it as much as that's the journey, and if you want to be on that far right, right side of the spectrum where all the opportunities are coming to you, and the only selling you're doing is having sales conversations where you're deciding if they're the right fit for you. They're coming pre-qualified, they want to work with you, and then you're deciding, is this a good client for me? Is this a fit? So a lot of what I do is taking people from that far left side or somewhere over on the left side of that spectrum where every sale is a one-to-one sale. And maybe they're getting some referrals. And so that starts to get good. And then people say, well, all right, so I'm ready to niche a little bit more. I know what I like to do more of now. I'm starting to understand what my message is. And so it's the key with a lot of what I do is figuring out, how to position that, number one, so that you've got the right audience, you've got the right expertise, you've got a message that's going to resonate. And then how can you monetize that? Mm-hmm. And that looks like, your product service ladder. What offerings do you have? What price points are they at? And then ultimately how you sell that, which of course is your focus on this podcast. And this idea that we can get to a place where it's mostly inbound. And I don't know that I know anybody where it's 100% inbound, where they never do anything besides their authority building pieces. There's a few people who are very sort of like let's take an example. These are not my clients, but of a world-renowned neurosurgeon, like a pediatric neurosurgeon. That's someone who doesn't really have to worry. Those leads are all going to be generated automatically. But for most of us, we're working our way towards building more authority so that we can sell, I'm going to say more efficiently. I don't think it means without conversations, but I think we can sell more efficiently so that we're spending our time with the right people when we do have these conversations.
So let me just make sure I'm getting this right. So we have the spectrum of authority from left to right. We have sort of like the one-off, I don't know who you are. You got to convince me that you're the right person to solve my problem, to the other side where you're such a renowned authority that someone has to convince you that they're worthy of your attention.
Yes.
Okay. I like that. That's useful.
Well, and I think of it like the far left side. That's where most people start when they do their business, because they've been inside a corporation. Mm-hmm. They know people, but they may not have a big network, and the people who know them think of them as an employee. So there's a lot of pitching that goes on. Hey, Joe, let me tell you, I just started my company and this is what I'm doing. Would love to work with you. Versus the authority, which is, it's a gatekeeper essentially.
Right. And it doesn't necessarily mean that at the far right end of the spectrum, where people are kind of applying to work with you, or you're sort of like not having to do sales. I think some people think of that as, I have an online course, or I have a book or a workshop or something where I don't talk to people. They just click add to cart. And there's nothing wrong with that model either, but that's not necessarily what you're talking about. It could still be high-end custom consulting. The difference is just that you're basically qualifying people in your waiting room.
Yes. Yeah. It's really both. So if you've got someone who really doesn't want to talk to anybody ever, then that model of having stuff that you can buy by clicking a button, that's probably a better solution. Mm-hmm. And just don't kid yourself. You will still be selling. You're going to be, I'll use the word marketing here. You're going to be marketing the heck out of your stuff. You're going to be pushing it until you get to the point, kind of a tipping point where they kind of come to you, but you're still always going to be working on that. But I have some clients that think very high end. They provide services to a niche. They provide a service that has a transformative value on the bottom line of their companies, of their clients' companies. Those are the people who can get pretty far to the right end of that. And just by writing, speaking, and when I say writing, that usually includes a book on that far end of the spectrum. And these are people that some of them will get, as soloists, will get $200, $300, $500, even $1 million for an assignment. So absolutely that exists. I think people think it's like an urban myth, but I'm here to tell you it does exist. It is not common, but it absolutely does exist.
Well, and I think like, everyone wants to be off the hamster wheel, right? And feeling like you're chasing something and you're desperate, and you want to feel like good people are coming to you, and the you're excited about the work. You're not just doing it because, oh gosh, I got to pay the rent this month or pay the mortgage this month or whatever. But I also know a lot of people who maybe the spectrum isn't really all that broad, and everything is kind of blurring together in the sense that, they get a few referrals, and then they maybe spend more time talking to their referral partners than anything else. And then those referral partners basically feed them all the business they can handle. So, I'm not sure if they're really doing sales per se, but they're still kind of nurturing those relationships just in a more leveraged way. Where does that fit on the spectrum?
That's a really good question. It definitely fits in there. I would put it somewhere between the middle and the far right hand side, because I always think of those folks as centers of influence. Like I
Okay.
always think of that as part of any marketing and sales exercise. It's like, who are the people who have access to the people that I'd like to work with? Like a classic would be like if you're an estate lawyer, then you probably have a bunch of CPAs in your network because they're
Mhm.
a great referral source. You probably have a bunch of financial advisors because they're a great referral source. And there are people, I know some of them, who have been able to create really vibrant businesses that way, in sort of a, I sort of think of it as a like, I don't want to say a level up in the sense that it's better. It's just more efficient, right? Where they really are known not by clients, but they're known by other people in their profession or a related profession. The only risk with that, and I think it's always a risk with referrals, is that you don't really have any control over the spigot
Mhm.
with referrals. They either refer you or they don't. And God forbid if your referrals are all coming from one place or like
Right.
one platform, like a social media platform, then that feels a little risky. I would
Mhm.
still want to be meeting clients. I would want to have some way of talking to people who weren't just those referral sources, unless I just had so many and they were so good that, I just didn't need to. That's a little bit different situation.
So that brings up so many questions for me. And I think one of them is, how good are these referrals? And the more powerfully you define your niche, the easier it is to build authority in it, the easier it is to be recognized for that authority, and the easier it is to get referrals and so on within that niche. So I think a lot of this is sort of like through the leverage of the niche is going to help you get further along this spectrum almost more than anything else. And a lot of I think the initial one by one conversations, a lot of the value they provide is helping you really understand what your niche is and using the right language to describe it, which I think is something that people struggle with because they're so busy using the language of their expertise, which is a little different than the language of their clients.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think of a niche as two parts, one is what's your expertise? Like, how do you apply that? And the other is who do you apply it for? So you have those two aspects. And I think what happens is we can say, oh, I'm a financial planner. Oh, I'm a network engineer. Well, a network engineer for whom? Like
Mm-hmm.
just anybody. Although these
Right.
days network engineers are so valuable, they probably could get away with that. But if you are setting up a solo shop, you want to have a clear niche, a clear area of expertise, and the kind of person or company that you focus on. And that's the biggest fear when people first start, when they hang their shingle. That's the last thing they want to do. They're like, I was in this little, like, dingy little cubicle in big corporation X, and I want to do everything. I want to explore it all.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, go do that. And then usually your first year is a great year because everybody that you know wants to help you and they'll
Mm-hmm.
send you work. The second year tends to be not so great. Like
Mm-hmm.
the freshman year, great. Sophomore year, not so great. And then usually what happens is that we start to see, oh, I like to work with this kind of a person or this kind of a company or solve this kind of problem. And so we kind of gradually get into it. But there's a price to pay when we extend the amount of time it takes us to niche. And the
Mm-hmm.
price is, you're on the hamster wheel with with luck, you're on the hamster wheel. You might just be sitting there on the hamster wheel. It's not turning, it's not bringing you anything. So it's the sooner you can get to a niche, even if it winds up not being the right one for you, the faster you're going to get to this business that most of us want, which is sustainable. It's vibrant. We're earning whatever number we've set for ourselves. We have enough free time and enough flexibility that we don't feel like we're on that constant hamster wheel. Niching is king.
Yeah, I'm such a believer. Now, something that I see a lot of, and maybe I see it because I went through it myself. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this. But I swear I come across this all the time. People who want to basically be on the far right side, want to never talk to anybody, want to have like a 15 step for if then else switches email campaign that's going to do everything for them, so they don't have to talk to people. And most of them are nowhere near ready to do that because they don't actually know what their niche is. And they're sort of like commoditizing themselves by just sort of like doing a bunch of emails. Like, I mean, you open your inbox and there's messages in your inbox and from LinkedIn, all these folks pitching you stuff that all sound the same. And I think my personal opinion, my own story is, I try to avoid talking to people because I'm an introvert and I don't like selling. And that was really dumb because I actually love talking to people if I can set it up and do it on my terms. And lo and behold, if I do that, I learn so much faster and more effectively and get clients so much more easily. Like, why did I spend all this time trying to do the opposite of what I should be doing? So I'm sort of a convert to let's have the conversations. How do you feel about this? And how does it relate to moving across the spectrum?
Oh, well, first of all, I mean, I just do not try to avoid having real conversations. I know the more introverted we are, the more that feels like too risky, or it feels, if it doesn't feel risky, it feels intrusive. Like, I don't think that person would really want to have a conversation.
Right.
But guess what? If you have something to offer them, they would probably love to have a conversation with you, provided it's not, this pitch,
Right.
buy this, but it's a conversation about a challenge that they're facing. And those conversations are not that hard to get. You just have to ask and then be in the moment with them. So my argument is that I don't, even if I were a severe introvert, I still wouldn't want to not have conversations across the spectrum. Even if it was hard, I would still want to do it because I know that the outcome is going to be worth the investment. That I call it your authority circle. Like, it's usually about 100, 150 people that you know on some level. And these are the people that you want to keep apprised of what you're doing, just like you want to know what they are doing so you can help them. It's kind of this mutual help society where your audiences have some crossover. And you're not going to know that if you don't talk to them once in a while. That's part of, getting human relationships. It's hard to feel connected if you never speak.
Right. It's like, I don't understand why they don't know about my new positioning. I updated my LinkedIn profile and changed a few words on my website. Shouldn't they be clued into exactly where my business is going and sending me the new type of referrals? No, you didn't actually talk to them. They have no idea what you're doing. And they would love to send you the right referrals.
Exactly. It's such a process too. And I've been guilty of it too. I'll update something on my website and I'll forget that I did it and I'm not talking about it. And I was like, oh, I have to actually mention it because guess what? The people that I know aren't running to my website to see what's up there. Hello, they don't care. So it's you have to find a way to make them care because it's related to what they worry about, what their challenges or opportunities are.
So as someone who hid from all these conversations for a long time and made all those excuses you're talking about, like, oh, they're busy, they don't want to talk to me, blah, 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 blah. What would you tell people trying to get over that hump? Because I'm convinced once they get over the hump and start doing it, it's going to be so rewarding. They're going to want to keep doing it. It's just a matter of kind of getting started.
Well, I would pick the lowest hanging fruit possible because whenever we start something, we need some wins, right? And so the win could be someone that, you're pretty confident they're going to say yes. I mean, it might be your next door neighbor, but so what? It'll give you some practice. So that's where I would start, is with somebody that where you're pretty confident they would say yes.
And when you
And
say
then
yes, you mean yes to the conversation,
yes
not
to the
yes, I'm going to hire you.
conversation. Yes. Yes to the conversation, not yes, I'm going to hire
Right.
you. Now, the ideal is they say yes to the conversation and they fit some parameters that make it likely that they might hire you. But that still doesn't mean that they're interested, they need you, or they're even going to like you. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you just don't know. But you could, and those parameters could be things like, okay, I want to talk to companies in the SaaS space.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk to companies that are past the initial startup phase, and they're in some, you can identify the phase, or you can say that they're a post startup. Those are the people that I want to talk to. And I want to talk to folks in the B2B space versus the B2C, or vice versa. So you can just play with that a little bit, and you don't have to suddenly announce that you're niching in this way.
Mm-hmm.
You just say, these are the people that I want to work with. These are the people that I want to talk with. And you can start to find them. And then you can start to learn from listening, which introverts are really good at,
Mm-hmm.
from listening to their pain points. What are they worried about? What do they struggle with? What problem, if they could just solve it, would rock their world?
I think that's great. And you were saying earlier about, we don't want to be intrusive. We wonder what we offer some of these people, especially if we maybe don't know what we're pitching yet. And a lot of times these folks have trouble finding the right people to vent to, and having somebody who they can vent to comfortably, who really gets it, is so valuable to them. Even if you don't do any work for them, just that they got to like blow off some steam.
Yes. And, I just want to make this point, because people always think, CEOs and founders are the hardest people to get to. And generally that is true, right? They're at the top of the pyramid, and they've got lots of gatekeepers. But once you're there, those are people that have incredible pressures on them and nobody to talk to about it. They have direct reports, but there's things that they just don't want to say to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can offer, a safe space, if you will, and it doesn't happen in 5 minutes, it doesn't
Right.
happen in one conversation, but the way that you do that is just by being interested, not interesting, interested, which is what makes someone interesting. And so you can ask those questions, and you can feed back the answers. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
so when you said this, does that mean that this is also true? Do you find this? So that you have a way to really connect with them, both business and on a personal level, just that you care. That's enough. It's not like you have to bond over baseball, or that you're both vegans, or whatever it is. It's really just helping to listen and to understand them. We humans are really very simple.
Yeah, as a techie, I like to make things too complicated. In fact, I was a guest on someone else's podcast earlier today, and we were kind of joking about how we take this very simple process of talking to other human beings and trying to help them, and turning it into this elaborate contraption where anything can go wrong and a gasket can blow out and we can all get frustrated.
It's funny because early in my career, I worked with a lot of actuaries, and actuaries are super technical, really smart, all kinds of hoops they have to jump through to get their various designations. And I would go to meetings with them. And if you ask them a question about like the pension plan or the insurance plan, oh, brilliant. Ask them anything else, and they would kind of like, those on podcasts can't see my eyes, but they kind of look like they're petrified that somebody's going to ask them something about themselves, or that they're going to have to take somebody to lunch. And you after a while, you have enough meetings, you get past that. But yeah, it's really simpler than I think we think it has to be.
So I'm going to try to put words in your mouth, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, because these are the words that I like to think of as coming out of my mouth. It's like, figure out exactly who you want to talk to, and then have conversations with them and people who know them, and good things will happen. Like that has become my philosophy. And
I'm not going to argue with that.
okay, all right,
Like,
great.
it's funny because, I just started this new podcast with Soloist Women, and the angle is a little different than our other podcast, the one I co-host with Jonathan Stark, the Business Authority. On that one, we basically give advice. We have conversations. On this one, I'm trying to elicit stories from people. And what's been fascinating, and I've only done like 8 so far, so this may change, but the stories that they tell are so interesting and so connective that when we're done, I hear from them afterwards about some of the things that we talked about. And it's about more than, oh, my business did this or this happened or I followed this principle. It's we really, really, we're humans. I know we respond to story, but we also respond to conversation. It's having real people and we're talking about something that interests us, both parties, not just one of us, but both parties. That's where it's at.
Yeah. And I think especially you don't have this problem, but as an introvert and for all the introverts listening, I think we're told we don't like having conversations, and that's a terrible misnomer or myth. We don't like having conversations on someone else's terms that we don't enjoy. We love having conversations that we're enjoying, the other person's enjoying.
Yeah, because like if you're listening to someone and it's about something you're not interested in, it just sucks all the energy out of the room. And you can see like if you really pay attention, you can see the face at any cocktail party of someone who is opposite a bore, right? I mean, that's basically what we're talking about. Yeah. Some of my favorite party guests are introverts because if I can do a good job as a host and introduce them to someone with the same interests, they'll be going back and forth, all night on whatever their thing is.
That's a great point. And by the way, I just want to reiterate, great podcast, The Business of Authority, Rochelle and Jonathan Stark, Soloist Women. You don't have to be a woman to listen to it and find it to be fantastic. I recommend it for everybody, although I love that you have that branding and that niche. If people want to hear more, Rochelle, where can they find you?
Well, the best place is my website, RochelleMoulton.com. Everything is there. There are links to social and there's some free downloads. And there's a lot of, I think there's 13 years worth of blog posts, 14 years of blog posts. So there's lots of good information that's free.
Awesome. Of course, we'll have all those links in the show notes. Rochelle, thanks so much for joining. And folks, don't forget to keep talking to people. Cheers.
Thank you, Ruben. Appreciate being on.
Thanks for listening. Drop an iTunes review or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you've got a friend who would benefit from this episode, let them know about it. If you've got a friend who wouldn't benefit from this episode, but you just haven't talked to for a while, now's a great time to give them a call. Thanks for listening. Until next time.